Okay, don't be like me. All right, so I got the coil packs on the back side, spark plugs in the back, all new. One's an NGK. They didn't have all of them the same, so one's an NGK and the other one CarQuest. Now right there, I gotta make a trip to the parts store because I broke that. Let me see if I can find it. I can't find that little piece. I dropped it. But that right there is the PCV valve. So if the intake was sitting on the engine, the PCV valve runs to that other line I was showing you that plugs into the back of the intake. As I was taking that line off, I broke the PCV valve, which screws into here. Which 9 times out of 10, if it broke from the little pressure I was putting on it, it's probably was already brittle. And it could have possibly been already broke and leaking and causing some of the problems with the misfires from the vacuum leak, including the little small vacuum lines. They could also have already been broke or cracked, causing a vacuum leak with the solenoids and the different actuators in the intake, which also could have been causing the misfire. But I feel like that could have been causing the random misfire. But cylinder 3 did have a hard misfire. I pulled the plugs out the backside and look at that. These are the 2 that was beside it, and this was 3. So if you want to know if your spark plug's firing, even though the threads are wet, the actual section that creates the spark is dry. And see how cylinder 3 is just wet. Threads are wet, and the actual spark is wet. So three had a hard misfire. But those vacuum lines and the PCV valve could have been causing the random misfire. Okay, here we go. Now this right here is my PCV valve. See the spring? Has a spring in it to open and close. Because that's sucking air. That's sucking the air out of the actual valve cover. But it opens and closes so it doesn't create like a vacuum leak. And if you see, that sits in there and screws down. But it's supposed to be a nipple on top of it to hook the actual line to. You can just take that off with a pair of pliers. Now it's an O-ring on it. It's an O-ring to help it seal, and this is plastic. This whole thing is plastic. The nipple, the nut, everything is plastic. So when you take that off, don't pull a Hercules and clamp down on it tight as possible. It don't take all that, because you're going to end up cracking it. And then once you crack it, now you got to try to fish out all the little pieces and extract it out of the hole, etc. And pieces might fall into the valve cover. Now you got to pull the valve cover off. So luckily mine just broke at the nipple, and I was able to take the bottom half out. So I'm gonna go to the parts store. And since I gotta go to the parts store, I might as well grab me about 2 feet of vacuum line. I might grab an intake gasket if they have it, which is the gasket that goes right there, seals the intake down. Now let me show you this so you can see the intake actually out of the car. so you can see what you're working with. Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to do like I did, and you're going to take all the lines off, take all the bolts out, and you're going to go to snatch the intake up, and it's not going to come up. And guess why it's not going to come up? Because of this right here. It's a 10 millimeter bolt. I'm assuming this is the power steering line. This is a Nissan, of course. This is the power steering line. And they do the same thing on the 4 cylinders. So if you're doing this job if you're doing like pulling the engine or something, I think the 4 cylinders may have like the power steering line bolted to the back of the engine. But I know on the V6s, they always do this. It's a 10 millimeter bolt bolting the power steering line to the intake. I actually pulled one of these V6s out before, and I undid the power steering at the pump, and I went to pull the engine up, and it was still snagging the same 10 millimeter bolt. Which, this is the intake out. So if the intake is on the engine, you got this line on the backside, which is the PCV valve, which I broke. It runs down and goes straight down into the valve cover. And then you got this line running back. And then that's the throttle body. And then this is the line I was saying. You have to take this bolt out anyway, I think. But I loosened this bracket up thinking this line was gonna stay on the engine, but it actually comes with the intake. So I took it off at the right there beside the fuel line. And then you can see all the holes going across the intake. All these holes right here are the actual intake bolts. These are just the brackets. But when I flipped this over, I took this line off while it was still on the engine, and turns out I didn't even have to. So that line, and then if you do like I did and you take the throttle body off, you could have just took this 10 millimeter bolt out, but then you would have had to take this line off, and you could have left the line on the engine. But I still feel like this was easier because it's already tight right here when it's sitting on top of the engine. But that's it. And that's the spot for that power steering line, that 10 millimeter bolt. So when you get it ready to pull up and it won't come up, and you say, oh, I got to do the 10 millimeter bolt for the power steering line. If the intake is on the engine, you go all the way back down the middle. It's in the middle. So you go all the way back down the middle, and you reach down right here by this nipple, and you'll feel it. You'll feel the hole right there. And then that's it. Once it come off the car, it don't look like it's much to it. Looks simple, but it's a lot of, you can see where I done cut my hands. I done cut my hands up trying to squeeze behind the intake and under it and behind it and on the sides. But once it's out the car, it looks super easy. Now I'm feeling my gasket. When I rub my finger across my gasket, I still feel it should, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It should obtrude. I'm thinking that's the right word. Like, it shouldn't be smooth. Like when you rub across the intake and you hit the gasket, it should be like a speed bump. You should feel it. If it feels like a speed bump all the way around, you good. You good. Because once you torque it down, that little speed bump is gonna create the seal. Now, if it's just worn out, it's gonna be flush. Like even once you pull the intake up and you rub your finger, it's gonna be flush. Like the gasket is gonna be just mashed. You won't even be able to feel the gasket. It just feel like all smooth all the way around. And when that gasket gets mashed, it's not gonna create that seal. Which I mean, everybody should know that. I mean, if you're trying to tackle this job, you should know like how to test an intake gasket, how to test a throttle body gasket. Which the throttle body gasket is the same. So I'm gonna rub my finger. It's like it should protrude. It should protrude just a little bit. See how it's protruding just a little bit? It's not flush. You can see probably just a little bit of lip. Now, if you go buy a brand new one, it's gonna be a big lip. It's gonna be you gonna know that it's new. But I'm not gonna replace it. Now, if I put it back on and it's still throwing like a random misfire, then I go to the step of, okay, maybe I have a intake gasket leak or a throttle body leak, and then I go to replacing those gaskets. But I'm gonna run to the parts store, and then I guess if it's not too dark, then I record some more. Probably do like a cold start, see what it's running like, check the codes.